Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning to those of you on the West Coast. Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. My name is Dan Balkaran, and for the next 30 minutes, I'll be your employment lawyer. I work for law firm Samfiru Tumarkin, which is Vancouver, Canada's leading employee-side employment firm. Okay, before we get started with your questions, a couple housekeeping matters. If you have any questions for us generally, please contact us at help@employmentlawyer.ca. You can reach us at employmentlawyer.ca, which is our website. And as always, you can call us at 1-855-821-5900. Okay, and you'll see it on the screen right now. Okay, so I'm going to jump into the questions. So for the last about 2 months, all of your questions have pertained to mandatory vaccine policies in the workplace. That's starting to sort of die down a little bit as all employers are imposing or have imposed their mandatory vaccination policies. So I'm not going to start out with a little primer on it. However, if the questions all pertain to the questions you have today all pertain to mandatory vaccination policies, I might jump into it a little bit. Okay. Santosha asks, why are the airlines continuing to make their employees get tested? They told some of them to test or get a union steward. I don't understand that question, but I will say that almost all of the airlines, if you're talking about federally regulated airlines, which I think is all of them, airlines are tightly regulated in Canada. I shouldn't say that. Yeah, obviously all airlines are federally regulated, but my core point was that as far as I understand, almost all employees of airlines are unionized, and you need to bring your questions to your union representative as your rights are effectively collectively bargained. And so I can't really give you any specific advice without seeing your collective bargaining agreement. And even then, I would tell you to go talk to your union representative. So I don't know the answer to that question, but I will encourage you, if you work for an airline, to talk to your union representative. Okay, so why don't we jump in as we're waiting for the questions to roll in here. I'm just going to talk a little bit more about vaccine policies, what they are, et cetera. So, you hear the word mandate a lot, vaccine mandate. It's a confusing term because it's being applied in two contexts. One is from the employer and the other is from the government. Okay, so, to be a little more accurate, the one from the government is in fact a mandate. The one from the employer is a policy. So for the vast majority of people, if you are an employee who is not subject to a government mandate, i.e. a provincial health order or a piece of legislation or government regulation that says you must get a vaccine to continue working, then you're likely have an entitlement to severance in the event of your termination. And what that entitlement is, how much it is, it can possibly be quite substantial. It depends on your legal position, and you definitely want to speak to a lawyer about that. But if there is a government mandate in place, then your right to severance is extinguished by that government mandate. So that's the difference between the an employer vaccine policy and a government mandate requiring people to get vaccines. Okay. A couple more messages. Connor, is there any value to serving a notice of liability to your employer regarding mandatory vaccinations? I don't understand the question. I would say no, though. I mean, what would their liability be in that situation, or to use legal terminology, what would your cause of action be? What has your employer done that's incorrect? So it's important to understand what rights you have as an employee, which they're not substantial. But what they are is essentially flowing from termination beyond human rights, which are enshrined in each province's human rights code or federally in the federal human rights legislation. Your rights in employment, your as an employee, your rights essentially are confined to post-termination. Your only legal right in the event of your termination is severance. So, can they impose a mandatory vaccine policy upon you in your workplace? It depends if there's a government mandate in place. If there is none, then probably not, depending on what's in your employment contract. And, if you don't want to get vaccinated, or you're not going to get vaccinated, well, then you very much are looking at termination, in which case you have severance rights flowing from that termination. If that's not what you want, and I've encouraged a lot of people to look at this practically and make the best decision for them, a lot of you, it's a catastrophe to lose your job. And so, depending on who you are, I always use the example: if you're 52 years old, making $85,000 a year, and you have no university education, you can't lose your job. You have to get to retirement. And so you have to evaluate, well, okay, should I get the vaccine? Or if not getting the vaccine, if getting the vaccine is a non-starter for you, then the question then becomes, well, is there an amicable solution that I can reach with my employer? Can I speak to my employer? Can I say, well, I'll work remotely. I'll do some social distancing. Can we come up with some sort of arrangement here? Because in that specific context, losing your job or that fact pattern I just quoted to you, losing your job would be catastrophic. And so you have to really look at this objectively and then figure out what your strategy is and then execute your strategy. And with all of those questions, for almost all of you who are in this situation with the mandatory vaccines, you're going to want, it's too complicated. There are different provinces have different mandates in different sectors. If you're federally regulated, there are different mandates with forcing you to get vaccines. You have to know for your severance rights, if any of them apply to you. It's almost always going to be worth it to speak to an employment lawyer. Call us at 1-855-821-5900. Email us at help@employmentlawyer.ca. It's worth it to understand what your rights are in this situation, because your ongoing employment is too important. Okay. When is Tom asks, when is the federal mandate actually being put down to paper? I don't understand that question either. So some federally regulated industries do have a properly papered government mandate. Others have direction from the government as employer. There's sort of a debate in employment law circles right now as to whether or not there's a difference between government as employer and government as maker of laws. And what I mean by that is, if I'll take BC, for example, which is where I'm called to practice. If the government has been passing vaccine mandates in certain employment sectors, most of them health related or long-term care related, via provincial health orders out of the office, the provincial health officer, and the provincial health officer has the right to do so through emergency legislation. And so everything is in our democratic system is properly done within the rule of law, right? That's different than if, the energy ministry just said, we want all of our employees to be vaccinated. So as opposed to going through proper legislative and or emergency channels, it's just a decree from the top of a specific branch of government. And so the question is, does that specific branch of government, even if it comes from the minister responsible, can it govern by decree, essentially, with respect to vaccine mandates? And my position, and it isn't a topic of debate, but my position is no. We live in representative democracies, and so to have a properly enforceable government mandate that extinguishes your right to severance has to be done legislatively, or at least through the proper legislative channels, which in this case would mean a provincial health order from the office in BC anyway, from the provincial health officer. So, or provincial health office, sorry. So I hope that answers your question. Let's see here. Belinda asks, my employer has decided to change our base of operations due to the pandemic. I do have to go into the workplace, and this change would add 2 hours to my commute. What can I do about this? Okay. Well, 2 hours to your commute is no joke. That is a significant hardship, inconvenience, which could approach hardship when you're talking about, do you have young children? Do you have that you have to pick up from daycare, or do you have responsibilities to older parents or who need care? Not everyone can withstand an increase to their commute of 2 hours in a given day. So there's a lot going on with your question, Belinda. So I'm just going to tackle the parts one at a time. So you have to go into the workplace. Yes, for all of you who've had your job since before the pandemic started, you don't, even if you've been working remotely for the last year and a half or so, you don't have a right to work remotely. You'd be expected, if the employer said you got to come back into the office, I don't think you'd have a leg to stand on legally if you said, no, I'm not coming back into the office because I haven't had to come for a year and a half. part of work is going to the workplace. So that's the first part of your question. But you've already acknowledged you have to go into the workplace. Yeah, it adds 2 hours to commute. What can you do about this? All right, so this is a tough one. I think that you probably will want to talk to a lawyer about this. In situations like this, you have to really evaluate again how important your workplace or your job is to you, right? So is your job something that you've had for 18 years and there's no way you want to leave it? If so, talk to your employer, see if you can come up with some sort of amicable solution. Is there a situation where you can work remotely 3 days a week and that works for you? Or maybe you can come in, maybe you can shift your hours. I've seen people do this where they instead of working at 9 a.m., they come in at 7 a.m. and they beat the rush hour traffic, and then your commute is cut in half. So maybe there's something you can work out. If there's not, the question is, have you been constructively dismissed? That's why I wanted you to talk to a lawyer. You might be. There's a reasonable amount of time you're expected to commute, but if you start talking about 3 hours in a given day, at some point that's a constructive dismissal. And what I mean by that is the actions of the employer have effectively terminated your employment by nature of those actions. Now, Belinda, in your case, you have 2 months approximately to reject these changes by your employer, at which point you've deemed to accept them. So you don't have a long period, and then you can't challenge them. So you don't have a long period of time that you can wait. I would absolutely recommend calling an employment lawyer. You can reach us at, again, help@employmentlawyer.ca and 1-855-821-5900. Belinda, as I said from the start, your matter is complex. There's a time component to it. And obviously, I don't know how important that particular job is to you, but I absolutely recommend you speak to an employment lawyer immediately. Okay. Marantha asks, they said I can use any banked vacation or sick time now if I wish to delay being placed on unpaid leave. I assume because you won't get vaccinated, but I have to let them know immediately if I want to do this. Okay, Marantha, there's no question in your submission, so I don't know what you're asking, other than should you go with the unpaid leave. Well, they don't have depending on your legal position. And again, this is why I encourage all of you who are in this boat about the mandatory vaccines to talk to a lawyer, because it's too complicated. It's too individualized. I'm going to give you general guidance today, but you absolutely need to get specific legal advice from someone at my firm or, any employment lawyer, who's familiar with these issues, because it's far too complicated. I will say, if you agree to the unpaid leave, you're not going to be able to say you were constructively dismissed after that. So talk to an employment lawyer right away. I don't know what your question is, Marantha, so you may want to ask a little bit more. I'm getting a subsequent note. Should I use my sick and vacation time, or would that be consenting to the layoff? You can say specifically, I'm not consenting to the layoff, but at the same time, which should cover you there. But your sick and vacation time are things that you banked. I don't know if you want to torch them right now, but at the same time, depends what you want, right? Like if you ultimately are going to be moving on anyway, then possibly that's something that you want to consider. But if you want to stay, like what is the benefit from kicking a can down the road to the extent of your sick and vacation time? So let's just say that's maximum 2 months. Now where are you at? You're in the same spot. You just got paid for an extra 2 months. So I think that you absolutely need to talk to an employment lawyer. It's very difficult to understand what's going on with you without specifically analyzing your legal position. So anyway, thanks for the question, Marantha. Appreciate it. Okay. I believe, no name here that I can state, I believe I'm misclassified as a contractor, and I'm nearly getting nowhere with state agency nor IRS. Well, so IRS is American. Canada is Canada Revenue Agency, CRA. I can't, if you're talking about state agencies, you seem to be sending this from the United States. I can't give you any advice on that. I am called to the bar in British Columbia in Canada. So sorry about that. Tom, the question is that the federal government has only shown an intent through press release. There is no legislation yet for mandatory vaccines for federally regulated industry. There are some, I believe. These things are shifting every day. We've put together a web page that covers some of this. on covidrights.ca. It's quite comprehensive. There's a shifting patchwork of vaccine mandates from the government across the provinces and across the country. My position is, as I talked about earlier, but this is a matter of debate in employment law circles. My position is that there has to be a specific, properly through proper channels, and a direction from, no, direction is not the right word, a provincial health order, a regulation, or legislation requiring you to get a vaccine has to be issued, in my opinion. A government saying we're going to be doing this is not sufficient. We do live in a representative democracy, and I think there is a difference between government and anyway, this is my opinion. It is a topic of controversy. And of course, of all of these things, we don't know with any certainty. But from my perspective, there's a difference between government as employer and government as maker of rules, regulations, and laws. And if there aren't proper rules or regulations or emergency orders being issued by the government through legislative channels, and by legislative I mean if there's a proper emergency order in place delegating authority in a narrow space to govern to a specific entity. Again, in British Columbia, it's the Office of the Provincial Health Officer, so they can issue by decree in very narrow settings through provincial health orders. I just think that's an aspiration. It's not actually a mandate. I hope that answers your question. But again, it's very controversial, and I could be incorrect about it, but that's my take on it. Connor, I'm hoping to get an exemption accommodation under the BC Human Rights Code from my employer. I'm a unionized municipal worker. Would claiming a religious exemption be better than political beliefs? Yes. I think that political beliefs are going to get you nowhere. I think that for complicated socioeconomic reasons, I think that the pandemic and the vaccine has become intensely political. And in that political struggle, we'll say, I think that what one side views as legitimate political beliefs, the other side does not. And so I think that would be very difficult, a very hard, a hard road to row. I will also say, though, your political beliefs can't be something that you developed after the pandemic started. So it has to be something that goes back prior to. I would say the same thing with religious beliefs. I think it's, in all those cases, going to be very difficult. So the government has said with all of its, and sorry, you're talking about, it's not clear if you're talking about your municipal worker, but it's not clear if you're talking about dealing with a government mandate or just a policy from your employer. I mean, effectively, they're both going to amount to you being terminated. But one entitles you to severance and one doesn't. But if you're a government worker and you've got 10 years in the tank or something like that, I mean, losing your job is a catastrophe. You've got a pension building up. It's a very secure job. And to that end, again, this is political. We don't know where this is going. The pandemic itself, at least the government response to it and employer responses to it are political. And if the pandemic abates or changes in the near future, you could see a situation where these mandatory policies might also change, particularly for governments as employers. So, you have to really, and Connor, again, I encourage you to talk to a lawyer. Call us 1-855-821-5900. You have to assess how devastating it is for you to lose this job. Is severance enough for you? Is it a situation where you want to work something out, or maybe you agree to be put on some sort of temporary, not layoff, but a temporary sort of suspended status, such that you preserve your right to that job indefinitely, and then you go work, you go get another job, and then when this thing calms down in a year or two, and the mandates lift, then you can come back to work. You really need to take a hard look at this, because when you work for the government, you've got a pension building up, you have a very secure job. Losing that is no joke. To your specific question, I don't think either is likely to get you there. However, if it's religious beliefs, you're going to want to have you're going to want to have your religious leader write you some sort of note saying, I am such and such, head of this particular religious order. I've known Connor for X amount of time. He's a devout member of whatever religion we're at, and we believe this. Therefore, he is, I have advised him or I've told him that spiritually he can't take the vaccine. I you do what you can. I think they're going to probably fire you anyway. The government has stated right from the outset that at least as far as the mandates are concerned, that the exemptions are going to be very, very limited. Even with medical, they're only recognizing certain exemptions, which is a strange thing because health is uniquely individualized and it's between you and your doctor, but they're not recognizing doctor exemptions. They're recognizing only certain exemptions that meet a predetermined list of qualified exemptions. So it's I think it's going to be very tough sledding for you, Connor, and I would probably look at it from a different way. Don't get me wrong. If you have a legitimate religious exemption, I would advise them quickly that you have it. And I would also say, and this goes for all of you who want to challenge your vaccine, the vaccine policies of your employer, you want to say something to them fairly early on, like, listen, I understand that you're doing this for health and safety reasons, but I can't get the vaccine for X, Y, and Z reasons. Is there an accommodation we can come to? I'm happy to work remotely, wear a mask, PPE, social distance, as I've been doing the entire time the pandemic has been on, or something like that. So you make it very difficult for them to make an argument that you're not entitled to severance. But again, for a lot of you, severance is not going to be, even though severance can be quite lucrative, especially for someone like Connor with a government job, it's going to be a small solace compared to keeping that job. And so for someone like you, Connor, an indefinite, some sort of like bookmark status where you could say, well, I'm not going to, I'm on an unpaid leave. We've agreed that I can come back to my job later on if I get vaccinated, or if circumstances change with the requirement, the municipal policy, and then you go work somewhere else for 2 years, and then maybe when things have blown over, then you come back to work. That's something I would take a strong look at if your employer is willing to accommodate you. Just because, again, government pension, those things are rare. So, at least in the private sector. How does severance affect your EI? They're different things. So this is from Pedro. Severance is money. I shouldn't say money. It's you're entitled to notice, a heads up of your termination from your employer. So Pedro, bad news, we're going to terminate you in 3 months. Good news is we're going to let you for those 3 months while you're still earning a paycheck, we're going to let you look for a new job, and hopefully you find a job without being unemployed for too long, if at all. So what severance is the idea that you take that notice, which is what you're entitled to at law, and you convert it into money, where you just get paid without having to work it. And 95% of employers do this, in my opinion, because an employee who knows that they've been terminated in 3 months is going to be a morale risk for their coworkers, and potentially a sabotage risk. So plus you can pay someone out in a lump sum less. So that's what severance is. And then your specific question, how does it affect your EI? Well, they're different things, right? So EI is something you pay into, which is an emergency stipend of money from the government to kick in right away to help you deal with the catastrophe of losing your job. Severance is also money that's tiding you over till you get your next job, but it's potentially much more lucrative. And it's often disputed by the employer, so you might not get it right away. That's what I do for a living primarily. Is I help terminated employees get more severance or get severance. And so if something is disputed, it can take a while to resolve, but EI kicks in right away. But Pedro, you have to know that the government has said if the reason why you got terminated is because you refused to get a vaccine, you're not entitled to EI, or they're just not going to give you EI. Now they're doing this under what I think is incorrect legal pretenses, saying that your employer effectively had just cause to terminate you, when in most cases your refusal to get a vaccine is not going to be just cause. Just cause is where the employer can give you zero severance, and so, but it doesn't necessarily matter if Service Canada is just going to say everyone who got terminated for refusing to get a vaccine, you all get zero. If you wanted to get EI, you're going to have to appeal that, and that's going to be a long process. And I think you'll probably be successful, just because the government, Service Canada, who administers EI, it's not a legislative or regulatory change by refusing to give someone severance for not getting EI for not getting severance. It's just a directive from the minister responsible, and so that hasn't changed the underlying legislation underneath it, if that makes sense. So I hope that answered your question. Okay. Pedro, would you not technically get EI payments since you got severance pay? Again, these things are totally separate. You're entitled to severance if you're terminated without cause. If you're terminated for just cause, you get nothing. Or if you quit, you get nothing. EI is very much the same. You get EI if you're terminated through no fault of your own. Generally, the purpose of EI is to tide you over, or to help you deal with the financial emergency of losing your job. I mean, you lose your job, you have kids, you've got to put food on your kids' table, you've got to pay for mortgage payments. I mean, it's a catastrophe, and that's what EI helps deal with, and you pay into it. For some of you, your entire working lives, you've paid into it, and now the government is saying, well, you don't get it because you didn't get a vaccine. But they are technically different, Pedro. So I don't know the name of this person. A lot of employers won't allow you to use vacation when you get put on unpaid leave. Okay. There's no question there, so I'm just going to move on. Baker, I've turned in my religious exemption while 3 other employees got approved. They came back with 2 papers for me to decide and sign one form that goes over sell religious aspect. The other goes into over-the-counter products. It's a large faith-based retirement community. I don't know what your question is, Baker. You haven't asked a question. Please, if we have time, we're running out of time. Please send us your question so I can understand what you're asking. Vaccination disclosure policy. Can a company demand an employee's vaccination status? This is an interesting question that I get a lot. So it's a good question. Technically, under a privacy legislation, probably not. But practicalities, and for all of you, you have to look at this practically. What's going to happen if you don't disclose your vaccination status? You're going to get fired. And most of you are going to get fired. Some of you will be put on unpaid leave, but you're going to get fired. And so for those of you who are vaccinated, is not disclosing worth getting fired? For some of you, it might be. But for others, not. How much, as I keep saying over and over again, how much of a catastrophe is it for you to lose your job? If it's a job you've been to for only a year and you don't care about it very much, and you'd like to get your severance and move on, then maybe that's what you. But maybe if you've been there for 20 years and that's all and you're making a really good wage, and you're in a sector that's not very transferable, then maybe it's a disaster. So you need to look at it practically and decide what the best course of action is for you. And absolutely 100% talk to an employment lawyer. It's too complicated. You've got to speak to somebody like me to figure this out, or at least what your legal position is, so you can make the best decision for you. Again, you can reach us at help@employmentlawyer.ca, and you can get us at 1-855-821-5900. If you have a specific question for me, you can find me at employmentlawyer.ca. We're almost done. I'll try to get a couple more in, and then we're out of time, unfortunately. So I was placed on unpaid leave for working for a federally regulated company for 9+ years. Do you think I'd be able to receive a severance package? So that's Jessica. Jessica, it depends entirely on whether or not there's a government mandate in your employment sector that requires your employer to make sure that that only vaccinated employees can work at your employer. If there is, no, you don't have a right to severance. If there isn't, you may have a right to severance, but you've been placed on unpaid leave, so your employer doesn't have a right to just stop paying you. Okay, there's nothing in your employment contract that contemplates that. So you can claim that you've been constructively dismissed in the event that there's no mandatory government vaccine, but you only have, let's say, 2 months to make that call. So of all the people I've spoken to today, Jessica, you need to speak to an employment lawyer right away. So I think let's call it there. Jessica, again, you can contact us at employmentlawyer.ca, help at employmentlawyer.ca, or 1-855-821-5900. Your questions were all great today. Good to see all of you. I will be back in 2 weeks, but you can join us Monday, November 15th with the fantastically named Chris Justice. He will answer all your questions. From what I can see today, they'll mostly be mandatory vaccine related. Again, obviously a complicated time right now with respect to employment. I hope that some of the answers I gave to you today were helpful to you. And again, I'll just leave you with this. It's far too complicated with the patchwork of different regulations and government health orders to go it alone. You need to speak to an employment lawyer about your matter if you are in danger of losing your jobs. Contact us, contact an employment lawyer. It's just too important. Your job is too important. Okay, thank you very much. You guys have a wonderful day. I'll see you in 2 weeks.